Welcome to This Team is Killing Us, a podcast about what the Carolina Panthers do to good people. She is Lauren Brownlow. I am Demetri Lauren. And Lauren, what is killing me today is I thought people that went to Stanford were supposed to be smart. I don't want to waste too much time on Frank Reich, other than to say I am flabbergasted that anybody, even one of his former players, can look at his time in Charlotte and say that dude should be a head coach on any level again, even on an interim basis.
I mean, let's be honest. There's two things that are always true. Well, they're kind of connected things, so I'll just say one universal truth, I would say, in both college football and in the NFL, that there is a widespread belief that, like, it's very different here, you know? And so, like, even if you've had a bad time at whatever level you were at before, you know, people assume, okay. Like, I was fascinated by the whole Matt Rule phenomenon when it happened.
Sure.
Because I was like, literally, what evidence do we have to point to the fact that he'd be a good NFL coach? Like, I could see none. You know,
he had spent a year as a position coach with the Giants, like decades earlier, if I remember right.
Right. And like they're, you know, whereas like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, why was he the name du jour? I don't know. But I just don't know that there's always a super great connection between like what you did at the other level and because we see coaches hired. Look at Bill O'Brien. Why did anyone hire Bill O'Brien? And yet it worked. And so I bet you that the sort of trend line they're working on this is like, okay, they hired Bill O'Brien, it worked out. UNC hired Bill Belichick, TBD, but nothing usually works well for UNC football. So, you know, and then, okay, let's just try this. I don't know. And that's a guy that Andrew Luck trusts. So I get it from that perspective. But like, I don't know, though. Do you not like see someone you trust do something questionable and you're like, maybe I don't trust them as much?
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me.
I mean, no, there has to be a part of him, a part of Andrew Luck that thought, oh, well, I know Frank Reich. I know this had to be the Panthers situation that drug him down. And I'm not saying there wasn't any of that to it. Certainly the Teppers meddled a bit, all that kind of stuff. But Frank Reich very clearly never intended to do that job that he took a paycheck for.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to know everything that went down there, but he very clearly, when he didn't get the quarterback he wanted to take his ball and go home, which is not, last I checked, part of the job description. So yeah, like that part is, and I mean, I don't know how often you're going to get the quarterback you want at checks notes Stanford, but you know, good luck.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's talk about the coach that we do have now in Dave Canales. A very interesting conversation. This past week was the owners' meetings down in Palm Beach, Florida, and every coach in the NFL was there. All of the media had access to everybody. Kay Adams had Dave Canales on her show on, is it FanDuel TV, I think, to basically talk about the direction of the Carolina Panthers. And she had some very good things to say. It asked some very good questions about what we saw at the end of the season. How do you pick up where you left off after a new year? But one of the things she asked, I thought it was a really good question, was basically who gets to make the call at number 8? It's a top 10 draft pick. And I think we could divorce this from the Panthers a little bit. It is just a really good philosophical football question of what do you lean towards, the front office's vision or the head coach's strength when you have prime position in the NFL draft?
I mean, ideally, I think you'd want a balance of all of it. You know, I noticed you didn't mention the owner, but that's always something you have to take it out. Is it not? Like, and not just DaveTepper, PS. Like, I would assume, like most owners.
So I would say, I think part of, now again, I'm putting this on the current Panthers situation, not just any owner of any team. I do think there is a level of trust and belief that Dan Morgan is a real football guy and not Scott Fitterer there to do DaveTepper's bidding. That would be my guess. Although, like, look, you bring up a good point. History suggests that DaveTepper will not be quiet about who gets picked there.
Right. And so, I mean, it could play a role for sure. I think ultimately, the sign of a healthy organization, in my opinion, would be a GM who takes the opinions of the coach seriously and takes it into account, right? Because they are there to do different jobs. But I do think a coach's input is important and it should be taken into account in terms of who you're drafting.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, the person being held accountable for that decision is going to be the GM. So if you're the GM, you'd certainly like to feel like you're the one making it. And hopefully that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to play for you Dave Canales' answer, because to me, it sounds like Dave Canales knows that when it comes down to making the phone call, writing the name on the card, all that kind of stuff, it's not exactly his call, or at the very least, he is not going to be the one that gets the loudest voice in the room. But it also sounds like he recognizes that that's okay.
To be in this position, in my mind, when you have an opportunity to pick in the top 10 of the draft, we're doing all the work on making sure that we had identified the best available player. We've had some great conversations about some offensive playmakers in this class, some defensive playmakers, and we come away with it saying, okay, look, we are going to get a great player. Let's make sure we have the right guy, the right fit, somebody that we want to be a Panther for a long time. So that's really where our conversations are.
Okay, so based on, let's assume staying at 8. Okay, staying at number 8. I would guess they only had conversations about 2 offensive playmakers, unless there was the conversation of, is Ashton Jeanty just so good we can't pass him up? I think realistically the conversation was about Tet McMillan and Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State.
Demetri, I love Ashton Jeanty.
I know.
I would break something if they did that. Would break something.
All right. That's what I'm saying. I don't realistically think he was part of the conversation, unless the conversation was, we think he's one of the 1 or 2 best players in this draft. All right. So they have that conversation. I think that there are a lot of potential day one contributors and plenty of potential superstars in this draft, and they're all on the defensive side of the ball. And Dave Canales, I complained about it a little bit last year, still learning to call plays while learning to be a head coach, but I don't think he's a dummy, right? Like, I think he recognizes that, you're right, Lauren, Dan Morgan will ultimately be held accountable for the draft pick. But if that draft pick doesn't come along, a lot of people are going to be wondering what it is that Dave Canales and the coaches did wrong. Even though Dave's an offensive guy, I think he's pretty okay with picking a defensive player here.
Yeah, and I am too. And you know how I feel about it. I did my eyebrow raise slightly when they mentioned Tet McMillan. Yes. Yeah. The tight end, stop, please. No. Look, it's fine. Like, I'm sure he's great. That's not the point. Like, if he's not Antonio Gates, okay, and I've not heard that. Perhaps he is, and I'm unaware.
Look,
then
Lauren,
or whatever. Like, then he can get gone. Like, no.
I've seen a lot of talent evaluators who I put a lot of stock in compare him to Rob Gronkowski, and that might be the best tight end to ever play the position. I just think that, Gronk was like a 1-of-1 find, right? Like, he was a second round pick. Like, it's not like he came out with all of the hype in the world. I'm with you. I actually don't even really like Tet McMillan as a top 10 pick. The other part is, I think Dan Morgan is not a dummy, right? Like, certainly you have the conversation about Tet McMillan because there's just not a body like that on the roster right now for Bryce to throw to. You have the conversation about Tyler Warren because what if he is Rob Gronkowski? You do have to have that conversation. Yeah. But he also is smart enough to say, even if we don't think the weapons are good enough right now, we do recognize there was proof of concept with that offense towards the end of the season, and we don't have to panic and keep the defense in neutral just because, we don't think Bryce has his alpha receiver yet.
I mean, listen, if keep it in neutral in any way denotes like a continuation of last year's defensive fuckery, then no, that cannot keep happening. And so like, that's why, look, I like Tet better than you do, I think. I get, for some guys, it's like you watch them play in college and you're like, I wonder how it'll translate. But some guys you watch play in college and you're just like, that dude just is a baller. Like,
listen, I like Tet. If we traded back and at like 15, we're picking Tet McMillan, I'd be over the moon. I just don't think there's a top 10 draft pick worthy receiver in this class.
The only thing that gives me any hesitation, right, is it is partially my PTSD Panthers related wide receiver drafting.
Oh, sure.
Or not drafting. You know,
we
talked about Keenan Allen last week. That's a guy that I always used to wistfully look at and be like, they could have had him. You know, because I believe they literally could have, if I'm not mistaken. And so, like, you know, it's one of those things where it's like you hate to let a guy you really loved to watch in college and that you just thought the world of, like, go elsewhere. However, I maintain what I've said from the start, but Tet is probably about the only guy they could reasonably even get at that spot that would not cause me to break something. I might be like,
right.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you bring up the phrase cause you to break something, because even though I think we both agree from a maturity standpoint, DaveTepper seemed to take a step forward last year versus 2023. I do have to wonder if all of the conversations between Dan Morgan and Dave Canales, Dan Morgan and any of his scouts, Dave Canales and his assistants, I wonder if it all goes out the window because DaveTepper says we have to fix the pass rush and we are going to get, you know, Jalen Walker or Shamar Stewart or James Pierce Jr., whoever it is, like, this is who we want, period.
Yeah, I mean, that would sound like a good decision from him, which makes me skeptical immediately. But I mean,
I think he can look at what is an obvious problem and recognize, like, that has to get better, right? They had to find a quarterback. And then the next year, they had to find a target for Bryce. This year, clearly, they have to find a defender. I just don't trust that he knows ball. Like, I just don't trust that he looks at the best player and says, oh, that's the best player.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably, my guess, and this is just a guess on my part, right? Is that because it's not an offensive guy, I don't think he seems like a shiny object guy.
100%.
Like squirrel, like that level of distract easily, you know, so like the shiny object in the room is always going to be offensive, and he understands this team needs a defensive pick. So I personally don't think he's going to be as involved in this pick. He might say so later or what. I mean, who knows? You know how he is, or how he's been at least. But like, I don't think he's going to be as big of like a voice in the room as he was going to be for quarterback, because that's such like a franchise leading, like front facing position.
As a team owner, that is his legacy.
Right. And you have to be like on board with that guy. And you have to, you know, to a degree, because you can't be out there like giving shady quotes about your quarterback or whatever. So yeah, I mean, my guess, I was going to say nice for him to mature at whatever age he is now. Cool. Good for him. But like, yeah, I mean, I just think that for the most part, like he is probably, he'll let them, I would be shocked if we hear anything other than he just sort of let them do their thing. But he probably is like, look, fix it. Like, use this draft to fix it, which, like, honestly, you know, heartbreaking. The worst person I know made a great point, you know?
Right.
Not literally, but
the one thing I will say, and I know I have brought this up as a joke, but it's not really a joke from years of following the Buccaneers before making the switch over to the Panthers.
That's tough.
It is. It is, especially pre Tony Dungy, which is the era I'm going to go to for this. I think you look back 5 years ago at the draft, and even if you said the Panthers have to come out of here with a defensive back, nobody would have looked at J.C. Horn and Pat Surtain and said Horn is the better of the two players. Just nobody in their right mind would have said that, looking at those two coming out of the draft. I do think there is a businessman element that a lot of owners have to get over. Tepper absolutely has to get over. That says fill seats. And the South Carolina guy in, you know, right on the border of the two states. Well, you know, if we're not good, that fills seats better than the best possible player at that spot. I think he's mostly gotten over that, but I don't think it's a coincidence that he keeps stacking former Gamecocks on the defensive side of the ball.
Maybe not, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, that would just be like, it could just be one of those things of like, with all other things being equal, let's go ahead and do that.
I mean, look, the Buccaneers, when I said compare this to the pre-Dungy Buccaneers, they had some hits, right? Like Warwick Dunn, Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, all those guys got drafted because they played at the Florida schools.
Yeah.
So it can work out. I just don't think it's a strategy to bank on. I'm not saying that like they're going to overdraft like Nicky Manworry in the top 10, who's the only Gamecock that might go in the first round. It's just a nagging feeling I can't get over about Tepper of there is always the show promoter in him, especially when it's not the shiny object side of the ball that sort of governs his thinking sometimes.
I mean, I will say this. I think like we could, that's what we do here. We talk ourselves to death about it. Like we could, or like as someone who deals with anxiety spiral, because those are
sure.
We could do that into like Tepper. But I will say this: the one thing I will give credence to any anxiety about his potential role in this draft is the fact that he's been so quiet. Because as anyone who's had children knows, like it's the moments that they're quiet that you go, oh no.
Right.
Something terrible is currently happening, and I need to immediately figure out what the hell's going on. So yeah, like the longer he's quiet, the more suspicious I become about like what is he gonna say when he opens up his mouth again? Like I am legitimately, regardless of what happens with this draft, I am legitimately a little concerned about that.
In a weird way, the Dilworth Neighborhood Grill, I think, is taking slings and arrows, or was taking slings and arrows for all of us last year. Like, we do need another Charlotte restaurant to pick a fight with him just to take his focus away from the war room on draft night and let Dan Morgan do his job. Another interesting thing that came out of that interview with Kay Adams is it sounds like Dave Canales sort of hinted at the Panthers were kicking around the idea of making some big trades prior to free agency.
I look at this and I'm like, 7 touchdowns and no interceptions over his last 3 games. Like, I wish this season didn't end when it did, Yeah. You're one of those teams where I'm like, I wish that was the start, and now you have to pick up for there. I don't know how you do that, but I do think, adding like a Tyreek Hill. How quick did you text Dan Morgan about that?
Right. DK, we had the conversations, there were some interesting conversations that came up over the last couple of weeks. It's really tempting, but at the same time, like, we have to address, the needs on defense first. We're 32nd in the NFL on defense, and that's something where our focus has gone to make sure that we can, play good, balanced, complementary football.
All right. I thought about 2 things when I heard this clip. First of all, Dave and Dan too seemed very aware of who was out there in the trade market, right? That was the first thing I thought about. Second thing is money is clearly pretend now. Like, clearly it is pretend if they were looking at who they could trade for, what that was going to cost them, and they still had these big free agency plans on defense.
My thought was actually, so we're back to signing guys like that. Okay. Like, by the way, the normalization.
You mean as people, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, the value of them as humans. Yes. Okay.
It's specifically in regards to his numerous.
No, I didn't know. Yeah. I didn't know if you were talking about Tyreek Hill and his personal baggage, or if you were talking about DK Metcalf and 3 years ago, this would have been a home run.
No, Metcalf's fine. No, I mean, but the Tyreek Hill part specifically, I was like, I guess I just missed that time 5 years ago that lasted for 2 years and then never happened again, where NFL people at least had to pay lip service to the idea that a guy was like, but now we just retcon it as if it never happened. So that's super cool and good for women. But anyways, I would hate it. And by the way, this is not me saying you got to hand it to Jerry Richardson under any circumstance. But however, I don't think Jerry would have done that. He did not like to sign guys like that ever. If he could avoid it, and would often cut people who Yeah. So, I mean, like, I don't know why we've regressed so far to where we're just like, we're all normal. And it's not just them. Like it literally in the NFL, anytime anyone talks about him, it's like not even mentioned as like an issue or a concern. And I'm like, cool. Okay. But anyway, yeah. So that would upset me. But yeah, I mean, look, I think she has to ask the question, right? Like she has to at least.
And I think it's a fair question to ask, like,
yeah.
because she brought it up. I put the context in there for a reason. She brought it up. 7 touchdowns to no interceptions for Bryce in those last 3 games. He looked as good as he has ever looked. And now we just stopped for a while. So how do you, what do you build in for him to help rush him back to that point so that he can keep progressing?
Right. I mean, but I think like, look, he was progressing with the people that he had there. So, I mean, like for me, it's like, I mean, I get that. I'm not saying that you can't be helped by adding more weaponry. Of course you can. But I think what Canales said was right, which is that like, look, yes, you're right. And like, and I do agree with like what she said too about like, I wish they could have kept playing because I felt that way a little bit too. Like, let's see how this keeps going. Like, how does this keep developing for him? But like what Canales said is right. Like defense has to be their priority right now. They were the worst defense in the league. Like that's not, it's not the time. Like you said, money, clearly fake, obviously, so if they think they would have money to pay any of these people, because where is that coming from? I don't understand. But it's also like, look, this has like that last year offense was the priority. If there's a good situation, I think that they can that they fall into, I think that they'll take advantage of that. Sure. Right. But like, I don't think that right now they have to prioritize defense so far, at least in free agency. That's mostly what they've done. I've been happy with that. I think they need to keep that going in the draft because they are not fixed by any stretch.
Right. Yet, so I think this is where maybe money is more real than we're giving it credit for, because I wonder Tyreek Hill or DK Metcalf are going to cost a lot in terms of if you are trading for them, you are probably signing them to a new long-term deal, right? So I wonder if the conversation came down to, do we get a star or do we build depth? Because they went on a spending spree in free agency. Obviously, there was no star that got netted from free agency. I think Trayvon Morin is going to be very good, but I don't think you would call him a star by any stretch.
He better be great.
Yeah, especially because right now there is no other safety on the roster.
He is one of 3.
Right. One of 3, 2 of whom have no business touching the football field this season.
Correct.
I think that at the end of the day, certainly the defense needed focus, but also the defense needed so much focus. You could not afford even whatever sort of cap wizardry you could pull to minimize the hit. You couldn't afford to take that hit.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I just think like, I think they'll prioritize defense like we said, like they should. And yet, like you said, they can't afford to take the cap. And also, they did re-sign a lot of the offensive guys anybody that they re-upped was mostly like a lot of 1 years. I think Trimble was like 2. Yep. I mean, so clearly, I think maybe they're thinking they'll be more ready to make some moves after this coming season on that side. Like, okay, we'll go back there and maybe try to upgrade the weaponry more if we're not able to do that, through the more organic ways like trades and whatever else. Yeah. Like if it doesn't come naturally that way, because they like literally this defense is like whatever the worst DEFCON is. I think it's actually like a DEFCON 1. Is that right?
DEFCON 1. Yeah, like, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I remember that because I was like, you think it'd be like a 5, but no, It's like reverse. So yeah, I mean, the defense is an emergency, like all the alarms blaring situation. The offense was like that. They put most of the free agency money into that leading into last season, and the defense sucked. And so now they are like, oh, it's your turn. It's like plugging the holes on a boat or something.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. So along those lines, so I really do wish this team had landed a difference-making superstar in free agency. I get it. They're not usually available in the NFL via free agency. But as I was putting the rundown together, it started to dawn on me. Obviously, we don't know what DerekBrown is going to be like coming back from the injury. But like maybe all of us, you, me, anybody that talks about the Carolina Panthers aren't giving the return of DerekBrown enough credit for. There is a game changer, or not a game changer, but there is a stud on the defense. It's just a matter of, can he still play to that level? Like, I don't think losing DerekBrown was all of the defense's problem last year, but it certainly didn't help.
No, I'm with you, honestly. I think you and I have been beating that drum pretty steadily.
Yeah.
Actually, was like we were like, because we have both been like confused with some of the free agency. Like we're like, is DerekBrown not going to be back? Or,
right.
A little bit, but at the same time, like let's just say hypothetically he's not, he gets hurt again, which no one would want to see. At least there's a situation in place where his absence would not completely destroy the defensive front the way it seemed to have this past year. But you're right. I think having him back will help a ton. I think the tackles they've signed, I really like, to be honest. Like
it really does seem like everybody but Brown on this roster right now that, technically has that DT next to their name. They all seem to be guys that Dan Morgan views, and I would have to assume Dave Canales and Ejiro Evero by extension, view as being able to play in the middle of the line or on the edges of the line. Like, when we talk about an edge rusher now, we're most likely talking about an outside linebacker. So,
which is it's wild to me.
It really is. It really is. Defensive lineman.
It's a big shift from how we came up.
times they are changing. So defensive linemen, I think, have a level, or I guess are expected to have a level of versatility that a lot of football fans aren't used to. And if Brown is I would equate this to like roster management in the NCAA football video games, right? Sometimes you've got to fill a position. You don't have enough guys on your roster at a certain position, and you're not just going to move the best guy over to whatever position you have to fill because you would lose too much of his impact by moving him. I think the plan very much is to keep Brown in the middle because Brown belongs in the middle, and those other guys will find their place along the offensive line, defensive line. I think that's even true when we talk about drafting Mason Graham. Like you seem to hear a lot about that guy would probably be kicked outside as opposed to playing in the middle.
Yeah, look, they put the biggest this part is still true of our football watching experience. The big fellas are going to eat in the middle.
Right.
And they may put up like a 0.5 tackles in a game, but that is not their impact on the game. It is literally just eating up those blockers, just eating them up front so that your other guys can go in and make plays. And to not have a guy like that it makes a huge difference, as we all saw.
Yeah.
And like, I just really like, though, that at least if he gets hurt again, like I said, that there's a run stuff. There's another run plugger guy that they've got, and there's like more of a pass rushy guy. And so it's like, cool, good. We're meeting multiple needs here, and D Brown can come back and make plays. And is it going to fix everything? No, of course not. Because like I said, the secondary scares me right now. I'm scared. But like at the same time, at least you're giving whoever you end up signing there, and you can get those guys a little easier, although maybe not at the level you want, but you can get them a little bit easier than some of those like really elite D tackle. Like you're not finding a defensive tackle better than DerekBrown. Right. You know what I mean? Like the Panthers couldn't have signed one, and I don't think they could have drafted one. So like you're getting him back. That it's almost like getting a high draft pick back next year.
Yeah, agreed. All right. So I mentioned earlier that with the owners' meetings going on, all 32 coaches are down in Palm Beach, Florida. They are all available to the media, and they are all available to the individual team media as well. And I thought that Darren Gant of Panthers.com did a really cool thing where he asked some of the best coaches, the most accomplished coaches in the NFL about the maturation both of Dave Canales and of Bryce Young. And I wanted to read you, Lauren, a couple of things that these guys had to say. We'll start with Dave Canales' mentor, Pete Carroll, the new head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, of course, Super Bowl champion with the Seattle Seahawks, also has questions about 9/11. Very important to always remember. All right, so he was asked specifically about Dave Canales' prospects for success as a head coach in this league. And here's what Pete Carroll had to say. This challenge that owners have and clubs have when they have to hire new coaches, it's a very difficult process. It's a very difficult decision to make. There's so much that goes into it to find somebody who can immediately have their act together so that they can be impacting with the way that they approach the game. the people that they deal with, the way they think, the way they operate, the expectations, the vision, all of it. And Dave is equipped with that, and he can communicate it and convey it. I listened to him talk to his team throughout the year and heard him stay on point and stay true. He's given them a chance to have a really solid start. I said this all throughout last year. My frustrations with Dave Canales were never about, I don't think he can do the job. My frustrations with him were always, we're watching the guy learn on the job, and that means there's a lot he doesn't know about being a head coach right now. I have never been the world's biggest Pete Carroll fan, but I think you look at his track record, and Pete Carroll can recognize coaching talent. And I think if Dave Canales has Pete Carroll's seal of approval, that's pretty good news for the Panthers.
Right. He's not always good at evaluating the evidence and coming to the best conclusions, but
he just has questions, Lauren.
Oh, just asking questions. Yeah, sure. That hasn't gotten us anywhere terrible. No, but yeah, like, I was going to say, like, at first I'm like, oh, where's he going with this? Is he stalling for time? But thankfully he was not. Because I was like, oh no, it sounds like he's actually not on board with Canales at all. And it's just like giving some bullshit answer, but no. Look, and I think like you and I agree on that. Like any frustrations I ever had with Canales generally were like game management related. But even that, for me at least, I could easily temper and just be like, look, he's gonna have some of a learning curve here. And the Panthers, like at a certain point, you have to realize when you're the Panthers at the point at which they were hiring a head coach, like beggars cannot be choosers. And I liked enough of what he was bringing to the table culturally. And I think Pete speaks to that, you know, like just staying on message consistently and like getting people to listen to him. That was what immediately resonated with me, because you heard like a lot of times you hear some bad stuff come out, even if it's anonymous. Like when a coach goes elsewhere, you'll hear at least somebody throw in some shade somewhere about, oh, this guy was actually a joke or whatever. But people were coming out, you know, in multitudes to praise Canales and to vouch for him. Players were. That was an encouraging thing to me. And I think like that speaks to what Pete was talking about, is like he's in there and he's consistent with what he's saying to them, even when everything was awful. And people laughed at him. I know I did a little bit when he's like, it's going to be, we just have to stay the course. Like, we just have to try to get a little bit better each day. And just like, okay, yesterday sucked. Let's just flush it and move on and try to get better tomorrow. And like, I don't know that the end of the season turnaround happens without like him consistently trying to hammer that home with these guys.
I mean, we talked about this a while ago, right? The comment that Baker Mayfield made about Canales being an optimist bully, his 1 year as the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. But, you know, I mean, like to your point, like Baker Mayfield said it like sort of joking, you know, like friendly ripping the guy. He didn't
but
say,
I get that. I knew immediately what that meant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like my point is like, he didn't say that the guy was full of shit. He didn't say that he's an optimist bully and we don't know where we're going. Like he said it in praise of the guy almost.
Well, imagine like you're Baker and you get to Tampa in the circumstances that you're in, and you know, you're probably feeling not so great. Like in spite of everything we know about Baker, you're probably still feeling not so great. Like, to be honest, and you're probably like, I don't know if I still have it. And he's in his face every day, probably being like, yes, you do. And you just do what do what I'm telling you to do. And like, do these, you'll be fine. And he was. And so I think like in spite of every single reason you have in your face to feel terrible, Dave Canales is going to be there being like, nope. We're going to fix it and it's going to be okay. And sometimes that can feel a little, to people like us, I think, that are just more cynical and jaded and not professional athletes, we can feel like, come on, man, you know, but these guys, like, they need either that, like, you know, kind of like negativity to latch onto, not necessarily from a coach, but like from an outside source or whatever, somebody hating on them or whatever.
It's the Michael Jordan thing. Hold those grudges.
Yeah. Or they need somebody in their face telling them over and over again, no matter how many times they screw up, like, no, you've got this. We've got this together. Like, let's just keep going. Like, forget it just happened. Doesn't matter. Move on. Let's go. And there's a lot to be said for that.
that's a good place to jump into what Andy Reid had to say, not just about Canales, but about Bryce Young as well. Now that Bill Belichick is slumming it in Chapel Hill, no more accomplished head coach in the NFL than Andy Reid. And he was asked specifically about, I guess, the tough job that was presented to Dave Canales and how he handled reevaluating and resetting the quarterback position in Carolina. And here is what Andy Reid had to say. Quote, I thought he did a good job of reading the kid, obviously Bryce Young. Quote, I thought he did a good job of reading the kid where he was. You know his progress. I think they probably accelerated it. The fact that he backed up, let him take a step back, and then the kid took a step forward when he came back, that's brilliant on his part. A tough thing to do. That's the tough thing, to sit down a first-round pick, and it's really tough bringing him back, and then the kid responded. It was a great move. I am maybe not surprised. I guess probably more like it always reaffirms my belief in Bryce Young and helps establish for me more belief in Dave Canales. The number of really smart football people that immediately, when asked about this situation, the first thing they say is, I did not think that would work. It is a testament to those two guys that Bryce was able to bounce back the way he did.
You know, look, at the time, we said the same thing. Like, we both thought he was done.
Absolutely.
Because you do not see many guys come back from that. And like,
especially when the backup comes in and the team looks so much better in that first week with him. Like, that has to, I think, a lesser person, and I'm not talking about like quarterback talent. I mean, somebody that just mentally can't stand seeing that sort of thing. I think that would have sent them on a spiral. Yeah,
like me.
So, same.
Like me. I would completely lose my mind and be like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, I'm clearly not going to do whatever.
But it's not just from Bryce's point of view either, right? Like, if you or I were in Dave Canales' position, both of us would have gone to Dan Morgan and said, trade him for a box of footballs. This cannot happen anymore.
Or we would have been like, you know, even if we thought, because I believe Canales personally that he saw more with Bryce than others did.
Yeah.
Even before the turnaround and even like when he got to Charlotte. I do believe that about him. I believe he's telling the truth when he says that. So maybe like for him, he was always just like, look, this is, you know, I believe in you, dude. Like, but this is the way it has to be right now. Cause like he saw that Bryce mentally, I don't think was quite ready to trust. That things were like, that was what I think we saw immediately was like, he is not like, he's seeing ghosts. Like we've seen guys talk about that. Like Sam Darnold, like gets made fun of for saying that. And I get why, because it's Sam, but like at the same time, like that's a real thing. And, you know, to be a first year head coach and to like have the balls to do that. And then to like have Andy ball out, you've got to, if you're Canales, you've got to, and you do believe in Bryce, you've got to be thinking shit. Yeah. Because
absolutely.
Like, that's not what you were thinking maybe was going to happen. But at the same time, like, you know, we all know how those backup QB stints go. Usually they fizzle out after like a couple of good weeks.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden everybody's like, okay, well, and then it became almost a situation of like, now you got to put him back in and see what you got and just move ahead. And they were both ready for the moment. And I mean, I would assume Canales was probably talking Bryce up at every chance he could get and just saying like, this isn't because I don't believe in you. It's because I do believe in you. And clearly whatever he said to him worked. But so for him to have the balls to do that as a first year head coach and to just be like, screw it. I think this is what this team needs right now. And he was clearly right. And it's what Bryce needs. And he was clearly right on all of those things. And like, couldn't have been me. I would have been too scared to do any of those things.
Right.
But he did it and it worked. And so like, you have to, you know, that's why there's always been something about Canales that even when there are game management decisions that I'm kind of like, well, what,
right.
You okay? But like that stuff is what gets me, is because like, okay, he had an instinct. He had a gut instinct kick in and he followed it and it worked.
Yeah, it is to your point. It is what made watching him be so conservative at times when the game was on the line last year frustrating. Is clearly he's not a conservative dude. It is just a matter of like, you know, I think everybody has to protect their position at some point. I want to wrap up today on kind of an interesting question, because nobody at this point believes the Panthers need to consider drafting a quarterback at a position of real value, right? So it makes me wonder, as you hear conversation about both ShedeurSanders and Jackson Dart, and those are two guys who I think a lot of people look at and say, probably not really a first-round talent, but quarterback need being what it is in this league, probably could go. You could justify taking in the top 15. So, Lauren, that I have said for as long as we've been looking at this draft class, I think ShedeurSanders is the most NFL ready of all of these guys. I don't think he has the highest ceiling. I don't think he will have the best career. I think he's the one that could come in and immediately take over as a starting quarterback. If he is sitting on if he's still sitting on the board at number 8, and you're the Panthers, what do you do? Like, are you already figuring out what are the phone calls to make? Who wants what? Like, would you be willing to, like, if it's even moving down a spot, would you be willing to trade with, say, the Saints? He's in the division, but it is a chance to get a little bit of a bounty here.
I think you have to. Yeah. I think even the Saints, and it's hard for me to say that, but I mean, I think so. And I'm sure they're doing that. And I can't help but wonder, I'm not saying that they don't really like Ted McMillan. I think they do, but how dumb the subterfuge or attempts at it get during draft season. Right.
Of course.
I couldn't help but wonder if they wanted people to think that was a direction that they would go in, offense or a playmaker or whatever. But I don't think anyone's going to think they would draft Shedeur, though, so they can't fool that. But you got to be able to know who you're going to call there, and just But I hope I'm wrong about this for his sake, because I don't disagree with you entirely. Like, I think there's a lot of things he does that I like a lot, Shedeur. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling he's slipping.
I mean, I think he's slipping.
I don't know if they'll get any takers, is what I mean. Yeah,
I think he's slipping. I think Jackson Dart is rising. I don't believe either of them have long-term futures in the NFL. I could justify Shedeur better than Jackson Dart.
Yeah, me too. I was going to say, but everyone loves Jackson Dart. I know why.
I mean, part of that being an SEC guy is like, I've seen him play. Like, have you not seen him play? That's part of what I think every time someone brings that up. I do think that when you talk about moving up and down the draft board, I think there is one dude worth trading up for in this draft, and I don't think the Panthers want to pay the price to move up to get Abdul Carter. And so it makes me wonder, again, quarterbacks being quarterbacks, regardless of who they are, what is the price you have to get if you are the Panthers to move out of the top 10? Because like I said earlier, there are a lot of difference makers on the defensive side of the ball in this draft, and you are drafting in a different class of dudes if you move down to, say, I don't know, what if Seattle at 18 wants to move up to get their quarterback of the future? What if Pittsburgh at 21 wants to move up to get their quarterback of the future? What, like, Lauren, put yourself in Dan Morgan's shoes. Like, what do you need to completely change the ceiling of the guys that you are capable of taking?
Yeah, I mean, are you saying, like, in terms of the trade value? Yeah.
What do the Panthers need to be getting back?
I mean, I think you need to have their first, assuming the team has one to give you. Yeah. You need to probably take their second and then some other stuff, I would say. I mean, easy for me to say some other stuff, but, like, that's what, I mean, I would at least want, like, a first and a second and something else, or, like, a first, a third, and maybe, like, some future pick or whatever. A future pick in later rounds or something, like, you know what I mean? Like, but I would want at least one pick for this year. That's
a 1 and a 3 this year and a 1 next year, I think is, I mean, to go down from 8 to 13 or 13 spots, 8 to 21, I'm going to need a future first.
And look, we do a lot of, like, I don't know economics that well, admittedly, because I didn't do great in my classes in that. However, I do recognize this. Quarterbacks in the NFL are what we like to call, it's a scarcity, right?
Yes,
There's
indeed.
A scarcity of NFL ready quarterbacks. And there are teams who hear all the time about how they don't have a quarterback and they become desperate. I think you've heard Bomani Jones talk about this a lot on his podcast, of, like, how thirsty they get to just fill that just at least get people to shut up for a minute about how they don't have a quarterback. And so like the desperation that is there is something that the Panthers should absolutely exploit at this point, because there is desperation for that position specifically that is unlike anybody else that they would be trading up for.
I mean, it's unlike anything else in sport, right? Like there's just nothing else. And in even, I was going to say in American sports, but I don't think there's like a position in soccer that you look at like the quarterback of a football team. I guess at the end of the day, we go back to, again, always remembering that mock drafts, nothing really has happened yet. It is just people making guesses and talking at this point. But I think at the end of the day, you go back to how much of the slide can you attribute to smoke screens and how much of it is real. If you're Dan Morgan, is it even worth wasting time on making a strategy or figuring out what your strategy is if Shedeur is still on the board at number 8?
Listen, I'm going to hear you. I don't know. I honestly, I don't even think they'd have to do anything. Like, that's the thing. If you're that desperate for a quarterback, like, why would you not call them? Isn't that how it typically works? Or do you have to call the teams that you think will be quarterback thirsty? I don't think so. I think that they'll call you and be like, what do you need?
Yeah. So I said this one time on the podcast before, during that period in between stints as general manager of the Panthers when Marty Herney was doing the media thing, he told me one time that part of what you do at the combine is you start to have like the precursor conversations of a deal. Hey, if player X is already gone, but player Y is still on the board, what would it take for us to get into your position? Or what would it take for you to come up to our position? So I would guess he would know who to call if he hasn't heard from by a certain amount of time left on that clock. But yeah, you're right. Like if somebody is like, if the Giants at number 3 decide that they have to, you've got to get Abdul Carter. He's just too good to pass over, even though you do need a quarterback. And they can come up with some creative way to get back to number 8 that works for the Carolina Panthers. I would imagine that the Giants have already figured that out, and there's nothing the Panthers need to do at this point other than say yes or no.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, like pretty much they're in the catbird seat here because they're not the ones that are trying to trade up and get a quarterback. They're not the quarterback thirsty ones this time.